How have you been?
I've been good, alhamdulillah. Just been working and writing. That's it.
Yeah. What have you been doing?
Um,
Yeah, you mentioned that you're working. What are you doing?
I do petrol station. I just work night shift.
Night shifts. Night shifts
11.
are rough.
Yeah, yeah, not quite easy in general. I just close the door and if anyone dodgy comes, lock
Oh,
it. But
is there is
I'm a
there?
glorified cleaner.
What do you
That's
do?
what I do. I clean the shop. Basically, that's my job.
Okay.
That's
And the
my
night
job.
shift is what time?
11 till 7. So 11 p.m. to 7 a.m.
So okay. I don't think I would ever be able to do a night shift. Like that would just mess up my whole schedule way too much.
I don't. My schedule's already gone. It's got
Hmm.
already
What is it?
bad.
What is? I mean, what does a day look like then for you? I mean, how much does it affect your day in terms of like when you sleep and stuff?
My sleep. So when I'm not working, I sleep about 2, 3 a.m. probably.
Hmm.
When I am working, I'll sleep about 8 or 9 and wake up about 3 or 4.
Mm.
Or depends. Sometimes I wake up earlier. But if I have a bunch of night shifts in a row, then what I'll do is I'll deliberately make my sleep pattern bad for those nights, and the rest of the week the one night I have off, I'll stay awake, force myself back into sleep pattern, and then the rest of the week's good. Alhamdulillah. It's only 3 or 4 nights a week. That's why max.
All right. And how much are you making per hour?
8.20 an hour. So
That's not
okay,
bad.
alhamdulillah.
No.
Yeah, not bad.
You're just doing this, I guess, as a summer job between
Yeah,
semesters.
yeah, yeah. But I'll continue that whilst I'm at uni, but only 1 day a week. Then,
Still a night
because I'm only
shift.
contracted to 1 day a week. Yeah. Well, I'm not contracted to night shift, so we can have that
Oh.
discussion when it comes. But I'll only have to do 1 shift a week. That's all I'm obliged to do.
But it should be all right during the first semester because from what I've heard,
Yeah, yeah,
it's like a mix of both online and not online.
yeah. First semester will be easy. I took dissertation time, 10,000 words of pain, inshallah. So yeah, it shouldn't be too bad. But second semester is definitely going to be no working, no job, head down.
Oof. You take international politics, right?
So politics and international relations. So is 1 degree, but 2 separate areas.
In your third year, your final year.
The final year, yes.
MashaAllah. What do you see yourself doing afterwards?
Um, it depends, to be honest, with the COVID. I wanted to go into journalism, but loads of journalists have been losing their jobs. There's not many jobs going. So the scheme I wanted to apply for, I don't think is available anymore. So I'm probably, inshallah, if all things goes well, I'll probably try work for like an Islamic non-profit organization who deal with like Islamic advocacy in the UK. That's the ideal plan,
From
inshallah.
a communications perspective, or like what sort of role?
Yeah. So communications, or even like helping draft. So like for example, MEND, they do kind of work on Islamophobia, etc. Or Muslim Council of Britain, who do kind of like they work with Parliament and then with ground Muslim organizations to kind of help form policy positions and advocate for them in Parliament. So working in an area like that, I think that's what I want to do. But we're gonna have to wait and see.
Did you go into your degree knowing? I mean, like already having the idea that you'd want to do something to do with journalism?
Yeah, that was the initial intention. I think the world revolves around communication. That's my belief. Whatever story you told, it has a very big impact on you, and I think that as a community in the UK, we need to start taking ownership of our own story. instead of letting the Daily Mail or the Sun, whatever other newspapers tell our story, we need to start making our own.
What does that mean practically in terms of like the average person in the UK?
Oh, so let's say when an attack happens, right? We don't instantly jump to calling it terrorism just because the guy's brown, or
it's like the third step. That's the third step.
Yeah. So the reason I want to go into it is to bring a bit of nuance into the discussion, and change the way that because kind of right now there are a lot of good Muslim journalists around, no doubt, but they're kind of pushed aside, and it's so. For example, my favorite journalist, Mehdi Hassan, he does a great job. If anyone's seen his Oxford University debate about is Islam a terrorist religion or something along those lines, the way that he's able to communicate and like dismantle the ideas of the opposition really like kind of inspired me, to be honest. It's the best way. Communication is the best way we have to change the minds of the masses. Obviously, good character will change the minds of individuals that you meet on the street, etc. But the average British person might not come encounter with many Muslims in their life. So that's why we need to create our own narrative and tell our story our way.
I think that's admirable, and I certainly respect you for that. But it's such a difficult idea to actually put in mind. I mean, we can say obviously that we want everyone to have nuanced opinions, right, and not just fall to the stereotypes or the narratives of the media. But one thing that I've kind of realized is that people need to want to kind of have that nuanced view, and it's really not easy.
Yeah, I 100% agree. This is not like a battle that's going to be won in anyone's lifetime. No one's going to ever come around tomorrow, make an amazing speech and eradicate racism or Islamophobia or whatever other ills are in society tomorrow. We've probably had the most horrific event in history of the Holocaust, right? The mass killing of nearly 8 million Jews in space of a few years. And till this day, anti-Semitic attacks are the most common form of hate crime in America. So there's no way for us to kind of click our finger and say, okay, this is over now. But that doesn't mean that we have to that doesn't stop us from putting up a battle. That means that every day we have to try harder and harder, because it's only going to get worse from what I see. People need someone to blame. And we've got to make sure that we can kind of change that narrative.
It's not, I mean, in my view, it's not even the narrative, because, I mean, like what you said, it's the reason that, the reason that there are stereotypes in the first place is that it's just so easy to process something like that, right? Yeah, you have the good guy, you have the bad guy, and, the story follows a familiar plot to what you're familiar with. And it's like, to me, it's like, I don't know how. I think we agreed that like the root of the problem is that people need to want to kind of accept that there's more to it than that, just like that simple narrative, banal version of something, and that's something that I don't really get how to do.
I totally understand. The biggest problem I see is that the lack of knowledge of history. Now, I can't turn around tomorrow and make everyone a historian. I'm not even a historian. My knowledge of history isn't that great. But once we teach people history, or kind of truer version of history about how Britain came to be a major global force that is today, and the events that led up to it, etc., then I think people could start to understand things with more of a nuanced view. And that means that we start off by reforming our education system and pushing for change there. If you look at like numbers and polls, you will see a very big difference between perceptions of older people and younger people.
Yeah.
Which means on some level, the battle is being won. On some level, younger people are willing to accept change. Whether that will change when they're in their 30s and their 40s and they're comfortable in their lives, we need to ensure that they don't fall into that trap of saying, now we're comfortable, now we don't want no more change. And I think that's our main aim. We won't get change in the next 10, 20 years, but when my children are at my age, or when my children are 20, I'd hope that we can live in a society that's substantially different to the one that we're in today.
And hopefully towards a better place than we are today.
Yes. True.
That's quite interesting. I think, what did you mention? You mentioned kind of reforming education. I mean, well, firstly, I just wanted to say that I think what's happening right now is actually a great time for people to actually like kind of reflect on a lot of things. Not just because of the pandemic, but I think the pandemic, like one of the wisdoms behind it is that a lot of people have been able to kind of reflect on, you know, a lot of things. And because of the pandemic, the BLM movement just exploded. And then people started to really like start questioning about just about their role in racism, and, you know, taking into account like systemic racism and all that. It's been really interesting, and the thing that I take to heart is that a lot of people, at least from the my social media, I saw that, like, I know I'm not saying anything, but I'm what did it say? I'm learning, right? I'm being quiet and I'm learning, and that was really heartening to see. And I think another example of that is like people actually started to question, you know, Winston Churchill was glorified as a hero, but not many people knew that he was, you know, contributed to the slavery of many people in Bangladesh, was it?
He contributed to the death of 2 million Bangladeshis.
Yeah.
So what had happened was during World War II, there was a famine in Bangladesh, but Churchill, despite that, deliberately like took food away from the Bengal area and towards the British troops, basically saying that I don't care if you die. And as a result, 2 million Bangladeshis did die from that famine that occurred then. And Churchill is in many ways quite an interesting figure to view this whole moment through. You know, how we understand Churchill. It's a very strange, like, kind of adoration we have for him. You know, the way that people worship Churchill is something I've never understood, because even during Churchill's time, Churchill was not loved. Churchill won the war and then was elected out like a year later. But Churchill was never loved by the people of his time to the extent that we love him today. So I do think that this is why history is important, that we learn what the British did to India, to countries throughout the world, you know, asset stripping them, changing their ways of lives, creating new systems that these people had never experienced before, and then just leaving them to be without any kind of assistance. Grave crime, in my opinion.
I think it's interesting just from like, it's like from a Muslim perspective, Islam like goes against, you know, really glorifying anyone other than the Prophet ﷺ and the righteous companions and the prophets. So it's like the whole question of like making statues of people, kind of like, you know, when I read about it, I was like, okay, it doesn't really matter that much to me. And I think the root cause is the fact that you are, you know, putting statues of people up in the first place.
Yeah, I definitely agree. The way nations are built, the way the modern nation is built is very much on symbols. So as a society, we jointly agree that we love these symbols, we accept these principles, and then that's what makes us a nation. Because the modern nation state is a very new idea. The way that we have this very distinct borders nowadays is quite a new concept. So how many countries have come to form this identity is through this kind of, okay, we need to build our own statues, our own figures for us to revere. And if we can jointly revere them, then that's what makes us one, which is why attacking church is a very touchy subject, because he is seen as a unifying figure in British history. If you understand what I mean.
I think I understand.
But yeah. But I definitely think that building statues is kind of a senseless idea to me. I don't understand. All men are humans at the end of the day, and none of them deserve to be worshipped in that kind of way.
Or well, that's an interesting thing you said, where it's like the modern nation state is built on symbols. I guess it doesn't even have to be people. Like, how would a state grow if not from symbols? I guess is my question. That's what I'm wondering. I guess it would be like from a shared set of beliefs, if anything.
Yeah, I think the primary purpose behind the state in the modern era is for a modern set of principles, a common set of principles. So, for example, in America, it'd be the common acceptance of the Constitution, and in the UK, it would be common acceptance of British values, common law, etc. The problem with that being is that these set of symbols and values were built up by nearly exclusively white males, not to attack white men. Obviously, the modern white man might not have much to do with it, but a very select few group of white men come together and said, these are our principles, these are our rules. And then the people following it have come to accept it until it's become so entrenched in society that people who weren't part of the conversation, who now want to be a part of the conversation, are unable to change it without seeming like they're attacking the fabric of a nation.
So how do you...
If you understand what I mean.
How do you see it? Like, what's an ideal like resolution to these constitutions that have been built by white men at this point in our time?
So the constitutions in general were built upon admirable principles. So British common law is built upon very good principles. I'm not going to say that the principles are bad. The principle of the rule of law, etc. These are very good principles for us to follow. But what we do have to understand is that those systems need to reflect everyone. So, for example, the idea of having a police force is not necessarily a negative thing. But once the police force in America was founded to capture slaves and put them back into slavery, then we need to understand that these structures need to be changed to reflect modern times and can't just continue to work as they were. How we establish that is a big question. And unfortunately, I don't have the answers. There are many groups and organizations who will try and provide some answers, but I'm just a 20-year-old kid. And to be honest, I don't have the answers. No one individual has the answers. That's what we have to remember. No one individual has the answers. This is why it's very important that everyone gets involved. No matter who you are, no matter how little you think you know, you can be part of the solution. And solutions are only made from the bottom up. That's it. When people come together and demand change. Yeah.
You know what's the problem? You know what's the solution?
Go on.
Islam is the solution.
That is very true. Malcolm X said that. Malcolm X said if all of America was Muslims, that would be the solution. Islam is a solution, but not necessarily Muslims. I'll tell you that much.
That's a very good point.
State, especially UAE's decision in the last few days to to kind of restart diplomatic relations with Israel, and then Israel's continued to bomb Gaza. Islam, as the Prophet has taught it, is the answer. The principles of Islam are the answer. Unfortunately, humans are far too flawed.
Yeah, this is why sometimes I've gotten into conversations with people, and they will say, "Okay, we get it. Like you say, Islam is the solution for mankind, the best way of life, right?" And it's like, all right, let's look, and then the conversation somehow goes into Muslim countries, and I'm like, yeah, you're right, and then it's almost pathetic on my sense, because I have to say all right, okay, we have to separate Islam from Muslims, but then they'll ask if they had Islam, why are they doing all these things that obviously does not seem like it would be part of God's will. So it's I don't know how to navigate those conversations, because they are right in a sense.
Yeah, I think what we need to understand is that Islam comes through principles, or any ideology comes through principles, right? Whether you're a socialist or a capitalist or a Muslim, all these ideas come through principles. And the principles of Islam are the principle of unity upon faith. That's it. No matter who you are, if you're a white guy who's been in Britain for 500 years, or someone from Ethiopia, or someone who was born in Medina next to the Prophet's the Masjid of the Prophet, or the Mosque of the Prophet, we are all unified in the belief of God and in the belief of His justice. And I think that's a principle that we have to kind of go off. Whether we practice it or not, whether our Muslim leaders practice it or not, is a different question. But that is a solution: unity.
I think one of the things I found beautiful to me is wherever I go, for example, I went to the UK. The first thing I did was seek out the Muslims, right? Because you want to find you want to find people that you share a similar set of beliefs with. I mean, for other people, it wouldn't be religion. It would be, I don't know, maybe a sport or a hobby. But for me, it's it's not just a sport or a hobby. You can't segregate religion into one aspect of life. It's I share a way of life with these guys. I think I should probably seek them out. So yeah, that's something that I found really beautiful, and it's just so comforting.
Yeah. No matter where you go in the world, well, obviously some places might not, but wherever you go, you will meet a Muslim, and you'll
Vatican City?
We have it. Everyone says assalamu alaikum to each other, and that's what it should be built upon a common love and unity for God. And I think that's what society should be built on. Whether or not we can follow those principles or be perfect to those principles is not the answer. We're humans. We're all flawed. Yeah. But to strive towards those principles should be our ultimate goal.
Yeah. To kind of bring it around a bit, I think Churchill once said, did he say it? Democracy is what do you know the quote, right? Is the worst form, is one of the worst forms of something, but it's the only thing we got.
Yeah. It's very true. Well, democracy is not the perfect answer. It's the best answer we have for our current era. Unfortunately, we do not have a leader who we can point out and go, this person, I can give you leadership for a lifetime and you will not become corrupt. A great example of this is Gaddafi. So Gaddafi, when he came to Libya, he was seen as a kind of great liberator. He was an anti-imperialist. He supported many African countries in the region. And even to his dying day, he did a lot of good things for the people of Libya. However, in many sense, power got to his head. And what happens then is there's too much money to be made. There's too much power to be gained from acting justly all the time, unfortunately. And the trappings of this world will catch you eventually. So we don't have those kind of leaders anymore who can lead for 60, 70 years without falling for these traps, unfortunately.
But yeah, I'm trying to, like, you're just saying that. I'm trying to think of examples, and it's like, it's difficult. I mean, Malaysia's doing pretty well. We got like our last prime minister is like 94 years old.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, I mean, he's not bad. I'm not going to claim I'm an expert on Malaysian politics. I've seen a couple of things about him. From what I've seen, he seems decent. Whether he is or not, Allah knows best.
Decent is the best thing we got.
Yeah, he seems like he has good intentions. At the end of the day, that's all you can judge it on. If they have good intentions and they don't go trying to destroy people's lives, and then I suppose that's the best we can ask for at the end of the day.
I guess the real flaw is, like, just in terms of legality, it's probably anyone listening to this will probably be shouting at me, but it's like, to me, it's as simple as anything created by humans will have flaws in it. And so, like, if you just want to think about it logically, let's just use the thing that's not created by humans. You know, look at the legislation and the jurisprudence set by Allah, you know, in the final revelation.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, it's human executing it, which that's the problem. But what was I going to say? I can't remember. I had a point and it's totally slipped my mind. Yeah. I can't remember it. I'm not going to lie.
Nah, don't worry. It's been good. What, you started a blog thing. I was browsing it recently. It's interesting. Well, what started that off?
Well, we had a pandemic.
Really?
I kind of was I was kind of bored. I've written many articles before and never published them. I kind of just write just so that if I ever do apply for jobs in journalism, I have a backlog of articles.
Why didn't you blog?
The reason that I don't put it out all the time is because we live in the 21st century. If I say or write something incorrect, even if I'm 20 years old, that's going to follow me for the rest of my life.
So you've decided to join me for like an hour plus podcast.
Yeah, don't worry. It's you know what? I trust you, Zhariff, not to get me in trouble this time.
Oh, like the DAW video?
Yeah, let's not talk about that. But yeah, it's kind of, so I had written previously, but I deleted all of that and I released this news content. And I was very conscious to write my first blog on the issue of hypocrisy. Because at the end of the day, I'm not talking about hypocrisy in the Islamic sense, by the way. I'm talking about hypocrisy in kind of when ideas conflict or when ideas appear to conflict. That is we're very quick to dismiss ideas based on the fact that we think other people are hypocrites. So I like, you know, so I have a Huawei phone, right? It's made by the Chinese government, effectively, I can criticize the Chinese government whilst owning that Huawei phone at the same time. And that does make me a hypocrite, but that also means that I'm just a product of my system.
Maybe I don't understand what you mean by hypocrite. Like, how does that make you a hypocrite?
Okay, so for example, let's talk about climate change, right? Have you seen Piers Morgan has a famous interview with a woman from one of the climate change activist groups, right? And he's like, "Do you have a TV? Do you have a radiator? Do you have aircon? Do you have a car, etc., etc.?" And he was trying to say that if you have those things, then you do not have the right to protest about climate change, because they're two contradictory ideas, right? The fact that you're using non-renewable energy and using a car that uses oil or diesel is bad for the environment. However, you cannot claim this woman was a hypocrite, because how would she survive in the modern day without the use of a fridge, without using electricity? How would she get around without the use of a car? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So to shout hypocrisy all the time is a tool that is used to discourage people from talking about change. And my position is very much that we need change. So I said, look, I'm a hypocrite. I shop at Primark, but I call Primark out every day of the week for the way they mistreat their workers. Obviously, do not shop at fast fashion too often, but when you have to. So it's kind of me protecting myself from that claim of hypocrisy.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, just thinking about the climate change one, it is like, it's really difficult to be able to make to be an activist for that without going to an extreme in the way that you live. Living out in the woods without electricity. I guess the only way that I can see that would rationalize that is that you kind of made a value judgment in terms of like, yes, I know I'm driving a car, I know I'm using non-renewable resources, but it's like, but I have made that judgment that this is a smaller wrong than the right that I am doing by being an activist of climate change. And I think as long as you kind of have that, as long as you've thought it through in terms of like many different things, then it kind of makes it more okay.
Yeah, I'm not saying if you're a climate change activist, go and get a private jet, which is like killing the planet. Okay, then definitely you're a hypocrite.
Yeah.
But what I am saying is, let's say someone became like kind of a hippie who went and lived in the woods and then came in to talk to us about climate change. We go, mate, you don't even live in society. Why are you telling me what to do? Like you don't know what the world's like. So there's no winning in that situation, which is why we have to find like a middle ground where we have to be sensible and say, look, we live in this world, but we want this world to be better. So this is how we're going to try and make change. If you understand what I mean.
In terms of you personally, what sort of things have you thought through in this sense?
What do you mean in terms of?
I think one of the examples you gave was Primark. It's like, what is something that you are an advocate for, but like.
So, for example, my vision of the world would include a kind of international standard for minimum wage that would ensure that, according to the value of the currency in that nation, that all people who work are able to live on the amount of work that they do. So they can have shelter, food, water, and education, and access to treatment. That's it. That's the 5 principles. That's the 5 things that people need to survive and to thrive. And companies should be obliged to pay workers that amount of money, if you understand what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Now, however, so there's a person on Twitter and Instagram, and she's got a website as well. Her name's Also Ethical, and she just focuses on the idea of ethical fashion. And her argument is this: that I'm against the use of the way Primark mistreats workers. However, if I boycott Primark, then that means that these workers are going to go from having little money to having no money overnight, which we just see in the pandemic. When orders were cancelled, these people had to walk like miles back home with no money in their pockets and basically were starving. So in that sense, I condemn Primark for their practices. I also will occasionally shop at Primark, knowing that boycotting it is a worse evil.
I think sorry, no, finish your thought.
No, that's it. That is the thought.
I was just gonna say, it's so hard to do. If I know, it's gonna sound a little weak, but like, it's so hard to actually think about these things properly. Right? The BLM movement and racism is like a big part of me didn't even want to go into that because I knew the amount of reading and the amount of research I had to do in order to have any sense of an opinion or any semblance of an opinion in that case. At least the standard that I set for myself. So it's just, I don't know, it's just really difficult. I think that's something that I've realized recently.
Yeah, and a very interesting book that you can read or is on Audible as well. It's called Return of Race Science. And this is where all racism stems from. It's the idea of race science, which is basically fake science, that there's significant differences between races, which was one race is superior to another race. And this was found a lot back in the day. However, it's found its way back into the modern era with the kind of idea of race IQ. And when people start to accept these ideas, it kind of, not deliberately, but it kind of poisons our mind. It poisons our mind to think that, okay, so Asians here have the highest IQ, so they're the most intelligent, so they almost earn the most money, and then black people are generally intelligent. Technically, the studies are very weak. And obviously IQ is a very flawed measurement of intelligence, but according to the tests that these people ran, Chinese and Indian people had the highest IQ, and then like Africans had the lowest IQ. But again, these are very weak studies. They have a number of scientific flaws, but these are used to justify racial differences between minorities.
What do you mean by that?
So let's say we accept Asian people are the most intelligent, and then black people are the least intelligent. Then that would explain why in America black people are locked up disproportionately, why black people aren't in as many high-income jobs, because in essence, except they're more stupid, and therefore less deserving.
So you're finding a causation link.
Yeah, and the idea is very toxic. It is returning. I would really recommend this book. It's called The Return of Race Science. I'm very interested in that subject.
But yeah, in IQ in specific is interesting because it's like IQ isn't everything. It is a specific narrow set of what it's measuring is narrow in terms of like a type of intelligence. And it might just so happen to be that, from Asian countries are better at this sort of intelligence. Maybe, like what you said, maybe not even better. It's just that, there's something in the culture that makes them more geared towards this sort of intelligence test. Where was I going with this? I was going to say something quite important. No, if it was important, I wouldn't forget. Well, I mean, that's like, it comes down to a question of whether just the problem with an IQ test in general, and whether we should be putting any, like, I mean, it goes back to what we said about like simplifying things, simplifying narratives. And like, if you want to talk about an IQ test, what it does is that it connotes a narrative. High IQ is you're very smart. And so I think the problem is that in itself. And once you start to break down IQ, like the quotient of the IQ quotient, it's like, okay, wait a second, I mean everything. It's nuanced. There are other intelligence as well.
Yeah, I think the best way someone can describe intelligence to me is if you had class and you went on a desert island, right? On that desert island, would you rather have the best engineering work that's happened in the world? So you fell on an island yourself, and you have no way to survive apart from, but you have a family. How would you rather have a hunter and carpenter than what would the physicist bring to the situation? Do you get what I mean?
Maybe the physicist is like an expert hunter as well.
Yeah, that's very much intelligence is relative to the pace like going.
The domain.
Yeah. So people think when you judge people through intelligence is very narrow, and it does fundamentally change. But again, you can't change society overnight. And changing individuals is very difficult, which is why we need to talk about systems. But that's a discussion for another day, another time.
Well, you don't want to get cancelled?
No, it's not that I don't want to get cancelled. It's okay. So the way I see politics, right, is that there's three parts to all political discourse. Is the world as it is right now, the world that I would like it to be, and then how do I get from A to B? That's what politics basically is. If you get what I mean. Yeah. So let's say the world right now, we live in a imperialist capitalist, so a US imperialist capital world, right?
But I don't understand what imperialist means.
So imperialism basically means that the ideology, so America is able to subvert other people and other nations to their will.
Okay, based on through
based on. So one way is through ideological hegemony. So basically, whatever America thinks is right is seen to be right, no matter whether the truth of the situation is. Number two is through the use of military force. So America has historically overthrown many democracies just because the leader has not liked America, basically. And the third way is through markets, so through economic suppression. So America still to this day has very strict restrictions on Cuba, Venezuela, all countries who've tried to have semi-socialist policies, not fundamentally socialist policies. And in doing so, they've kind of force people to bend to their will. That's what imperialism is.
That's
in layman terms.
That's really interesting. Did you learn this in your program?
I learned some of this. I learned in my program. The majority of things I learned through reading myself.
Okay, that's good, because I was gonna ask you what it's like to study something you enjoy.
You know what? Sometimes you study things you enjoy and you don't enjoy the way it's taught. So the best module I've ever done is an anthropology module, and I didn't know what it was until I did it. And it was my favorite module I've done at university, and I didn't care about anthropology before I did it. So you find new things in life all the time, don't you?
Yeah, anthropology is something that I'm really interested in, because it's really the study of people, and it's like, bro, that could include so much, you know. But
I've always thought, if we put anthropologists in charge of the world, if we got enough anthropologists, we could solve a lot of the world's problems, because they don't kind of view things through an academic lens and like postulate about, we need socialism or capitalism, blah, 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 whatever these discussions are. They literally go on the ground, they see the problem, and they're like, okay, this is a society, this is how it operates, and this is the changes that we could make within that society that are beneficial to improving it. Cool. Because, Go
on, sir.
So what I was going to say is that we can't impose. So just because something works in the UK does not mean that it's going to work in a village in Ukraine, if you get what I mean. So economic development strategies that worked in London aren't going to work in a small city in Ukraine. So that's why we do need anthropologists to go into those areas, understand those areas, and then suggest how development can be made.
I wonder how you can get into that sort of position, because like, if you ask me that, I'm like, that it kind of makes me excited. Like, that's just like problem solving, you know. Yeah,
it is, but that's not to say anthropology is not without its troubles. So if I went from UK and I went to a village in Ukraine and I learned Ukrainian perfectly, that does not mean that I will not go into those areas without preconceived notions and biases, and also my understanding of the world.
Because that's the only thing you have.
That's natural. You can't not be human. So that will impact the way that you analyze places and understand places. So it's not to say anthropology is a flawless discipline. It has historically it's had many issues, especially I can't confirm it, but I may have read an article recently about how Britain used anthropologists and they kind of messed up certain areas. So it's not a perfect discipline, but it is one of the best ways we have. That's what we can do.
All right, sorry. Thank you for that explanation. But like moving back, I think we got derailed a bit. All right. So you're talking about imperialist, capitalist. America is imperialist, capitalist.
Yeah. So also that's the world that we live in right now. Okay, so we live in a kind of a US Western imperialist capitalist world, and so how do we change that? And what kind of society do we want? So number one, the first issue that I care about is ending imperialism and returning some kind of independence to nations, like proper independence to nations to decide their own future and their fate. And then the second issue would be about wealth distribution. So there's like 50 men in the world who have more wealth than like 50% of the world. And I don't really mind that they have wealth. It's a question of how did they attain that wealth, and can that wealth be distributed to ease the pain of individuals around the world through the proper means. And those are the two major questions that need to be tackled first. After that, there are many other issues that politically need to be challenged and tackled. But from a Western perspective, this is what needs to be challenged and tackled. So we need to work to, we very much need to work to electing officials who are proudly anti-imperialist. And it's very difficult to do so because anti-imperialists often come across as anti-patriotic. They kind of come across as like, oh, I hate this country. But that's not necessarily the case. They're more like, our country should not determine the fate of a country in the Middle East that we know very little of, or we understand very little of. And I think by addressing those issues first, we can kind of come to address the rest later. Obviously, yeah. But like you said, mate, it's hard. It's hard. There's never going to be a time in this world where there's a perfect solution. That's for the next life. That's for the next life.
I'm just trying to imagine what would a world that doesn't have imperialism as a backbone, what would that look like? So each country, it's just, I mean, the first question I have is like, imagining that each country is independent, which would also kind of presume that they are self-sustainable, and it's like that's not going to happen.
Yeah. The problem is we don't know the answer. I don't know the answer to that. Imperialism has taken many forms over the years. So if we look, I'm just going to go back to the British Empire because obviously there's many empires before, but don't have time to go into that. So the way that the British did imperialism, they would literally march in with the army, come to your country and say, look, we're taking charge. Simplified version, that's basically what would happen. Perhaps you take the wealth from the country and move back to Britain, right? That was British imperialism. US imperialism was a tiny bit different. They kind of were like, okay, we will leave you alone, but if you don't do what we say, then we're going to make sure you do what we say.
That's
do you know what I mean? So, like, if you vote in a politician that we don't like, we'll get rid of that politician and put in the guy we want. But now the interesting thing is now we're moving to the third stage of imperialism, and this is Chinese imperialism. This is kind of where China just lends billions of pounds to African nations, knowing that they can't pay it back, and then kind of seize controls of certain areas of those countries. And by doing so, imposing their will. So you notice a pattern where, so we know what's happening with the Uyghur Muslims in China, right? But if you look at the countries that have supported China, a lot of them are Muslim countries. Now, this might seem a bit confusing, right? Like, Muslim brothers should be standing up for Muslim brothers. But what has happened is China has loaded these countries and made them so reliant on China that to oppose China would mean the economic destruction of these nations, literally like overnight. So it's kind of a situation where now China's like you can't do what you want to us because now economically we have you by the balls, basically, in the most simple terms. So it's very key that we end it. How we replace it? End the nation state as it is.
What does that mean?
So the very rigid concept of borders is something that I've always been against. I understand why we do have borders, because we need a place where laws kind of, one nation has one law and another nation has another law, and we need a form of justice system. However, people should be free to move as much as possible.
In those countries or like across the countries?
Okay, so this is a bit of a concept, it's a bit confusing, right? But I'm going to try to explain this to you. So the way that capitalism works is that they need, the way capitalism currently works, not like the way that it always has to work, but they need kind of underclass of poor labor workers to make products cheaply as possible so that they can sell it to the consumer, right? So previously they were able to do that in America, but now American labor costs too much. They go to poorer nations like China and India to do that. Okay, and then these nations, so now it's in the interest of America that certain nations are always poor so that they're able to have cheap resources made for them within those nations. Okay. And as they know, individuals aren't able to freely move from, say, Central African Republic to America, like just get up and go. They have no incentive to ensure the economic development of those nations.
Mm.
For example, if I told Donald Trump tomorrow that I'm going to send half the population of Central African Republic to America so they can start to work, I could bet you your bottom dollar he would pump 100 billion into that country to make sure it became economically sustainable. Do you get what I mean?
Mm.
So currently we have a system which does not incentivize the development of poor nations, because the incentive is to keep people poor so that we can have cheap products, so that we can continue to buy £3 t-shirts from Primark or £1, whatever it is. So by kind of breaking the ties of a nation and saying, okay, your state is over now, you no longer have this kind of rigid border state, we incentivize Western nations trying to economically rebuild, well, not even do it themselves, but assist in the economic rebuild of these countries in a way that is beneficial to them.
Wait, okay, so say that again.
Yeah.
It incentivizes countries with more money. It doesn't have to be the US, but like Western countries usually, to help build these developing nations. Why is that again? Sorry?
Because then if like a bunch of, let's say like half the Central African Republic went to move to America, it brought such a strain on American resources that they wouldn't be able to cope. So it would be cheaper and more sustainable for America to invest in the future of these nations. Do you understand?
Okay.
Now,
but if anything, that would enforce borders. They're basically saying, stay there. We don't want you to come here.
But that's what they're currently doing as it is. They're currently saying, stay there. We don't want you to come here. But their incentives are negative. The current incentives are like, we need you to be poor so that we can have cheap labor.
Yeah.
What the incentive should really be is that we want everyone to prosper so that they can live sustainably within this planet. That should be the motivation, not we want to exploit you. You know what I mean?
Okay, we want to exploit you for our own self-benefit.
Yeah. Now, I can't promise you, there's never going to be a time in our lifetime where borders are just kind of gone. 0% chance of that happening.
It's really hard to even imagine that.
Yeah, but like I say, this is what I mean. When we say we have point A and then we have point B, we're never going to get to point B. There will never be a time in this world where we can achieve point B. There is no utopian society, and in this world, ultimately, there's no true justice. True justice and true utopia only found in the next life.
Yeah.
And ultimately, that's the truth. There's no kind of communist utopia in this world. Unfortunately, that's as far as I understand, and as far as I believe. But that doesn't mean that we don't strive for justice, and we don't strive to end hunger, and we don't strive. We have to strive. We have to try every day, and we have to pray every day, and we have to ask God to bring justice every day, and that's it. That's all we can do. We can't bring, unless you were like some kind of ultra amazing, nice dictator who kind of just was like, okay, we're going to bring all justice to this world. It's not
ultra amazing, nice dictator.
I mean, it's not going to happen. But it's definitely something we should strive for.
Yeah, it sounds like it sounds a bit cheap, but yeah, it's something I believe in properly as well. And it's like, but it's also beautiful in a sense. Like, we accept that, everything that comes from humans probably will never be, like what you said, we'll never get to a utopia. And that there will always be problems, whether if it's not politically, then it's financially, then it's, all these other things, capitalism, imperialism. And it's like, but well, you put it in a good way that even though we probably, we'll never get it perfect, we have to strive to what we think is better. But then, but we also have to be careful in saying that what we think is better has to come from the Quran and the Sunnah.
Absolutely, 100%. That should be our guiding light. Obviously, within the Western states, we can't kind of but we can bring those principles. This is why I'm very big on principles. We have to bring the principles of the Quran and Sunnah into our lives, into our politics, into our beliefs. We can't. There's been a lot of effort by certain individuals to kind of separate your religious beliefs from your political beliefs, to kind of say like they don't need to always align. I find that very strange. I'm not going to lie. Your religion is a way of life, and they should be the way of your beliefs. So we have to. That should be our guiding principle. Our guiding principle should be the life of the Prophet ﷺ, always and forever. Yeah, 11 leadership qualities of the Prophet ﷺ. It's a great book as well.
Yeah. That's a good thing to say, but it's like it's really hard to translate into actual. I think I just wanted to say, like, a lot of people, they do kind of like segregate. They do kind of just think religion is this thing that they only do in church, and I think it's easy for us to say because we've been brought up to believe that Islam is our deen. It's not just a religion meant to be engaged in only when we're praying or when we're at a mosque. It's like it's a way of life. So for us, it doesn't make sense to segregate or to separate, religious beliefs, but with political beliefs. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. It certainly doesn't. I'm not bashing no one who does that, by the way. At the end of the day, people have to make their own. They have to make their own choices. Let me make that very clear. People have to make their own choices, and they have to be true to themselves. But that does not mean that I shouldn't encourage my fellow Muslim brothers and sisters in the world to kind of adhere to that principle, and that principle being that the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is the ultimate truth. And that's it. There's no other truth greater than that, than his Sunnah and the Quran, the word of Allah.
Yeah.
And that's it.
This is a nice segue, actually. I wanted to talk to you more about your education officer role in ISOC. So this will be your second year running as the education officer, right?
Well, I did half a year last year, so this will be my first year.
Yeah. What made you want to even do it in the first place?
Well, because I, like I said here before, I think education is the first place from which change comes. I'm not the most knowledgeable person in the world. I'm not going to tell you that I'm the most knowledgeable person in the world.
Really?
But what I am, I am someone who does look at the world a lot. I do politics. I look at the situation of what's going on, and then from that, I kind of thought that, look, if I'm studying the world as it is, then I should be able to think of topics and talks to help people navigate through that world. And that's it. That's why I wanted to do the role. And to be honest, I don't think in history, in recent history, there's been a more difficult time to be Muslim, since the war on terror, and since a lot of reform. It's kind of, sometimes it's hard to be proudly Muslim, Sometimes you go around, people giving you weird looks. I go on the train to university, I will see people look at me, give me a funny look, and then walk the other way and sit like 10 seats away from me on the train.
Really?
Yeah, deliberately, because I wear my thobe a lot all the time.
Yeah.
I've got my beard, not a very big beard, I admit, but I got one.
Bro.
And alhamdulillah, sorry, it's longer than mine.
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah. It's kind of, so in university, it's very important that we provide a space for people to be proud to be Muslim, and that they're accessible. And we're lucky at Birmingham, there's Muslims everywhere. People don't generally struggle. But it's about making sure people keep in touch with their faith whilst at university. There's a lot of challenges whilst you're at university. A lot of, let's say, fitna. What's the translation of fitna? A lot of tests that people go through whilst at university to do with their faith.
Wait, I just wanted to refute your point. I think the early Sahaba might have something to say about this being the most difficult time to be Muslim.
No, I said in this modern
Okay,
era, not in
sorry.
not in history. Obviously, we're not getting dragged across hot sand like Hazrat Bilal radiallahu anhu.
Yeah.
And we're not getting tortured and beaten. And I mean,
Some
the
of
Prophet
us are.
himself
China.
had rocks thrown at him, and
Yeah.
I mean, we're not even 1% of that way. Like, there is no way we can even look at ourselves and like say we're near the levels of the Sahabas or the Sahabas. There's a reason they're the best generation.
Yeah.
But in terms of intellectually speaking, in terms of ideology, there's been very few eras in history where atheism has been as prevalent, whereas anti-religious thought has been as prevalent, where liberalism and all these ideologies we seem to conflict with Islamic principles have been so prevalent. And that's why I say it's difficult, not because they're going to come and punch you in the face in the street or try and kill you for being Muslim. It does happen, but it's very rare. And the real challenge, well, for us in the West, obviously in certain nations like in China or in Burma, the situation is totally different. You could be killed for being Muslim. There's no doubt in that. But for us in the West, it's more of an ideological battle. And the first ideological battle is obviously tackling the question of atheism. Yeah. But I know you're in your ISOC now, aren't you, in Malaysia?
Yes, I am the marketing officer.
SubhanAllah, great the other officer until the certain video.
I think.
Yeah.
I think you got your heart set in the right place. I think one of the things that I wanted to touch on is like, what you said. It's like being a Muslim can be a little difficult, but what I think it comes down to da'wah, right? Da'wah, giving da'wah to people, and one of the things that I try to characterize in my own character and the way I deal with people is like, I want people to know that I'm a good person first, and then have that in their mind, and then have them realize that that I'm a Muslim at the same time, and those two things are not contradictory. If anything, they're symbiotic, and it's like it gives me pleasure for people to kind of like bridge that gap. And I think that's the right way to do da'wah. It's not, if you think about the early Sahaba, they didn't go out giving straight da'wah. That I can't imagine. Like their da'wah was their character, right? People would see and be like, these people are the most just, the most honorable people that I've ever seen, and that would be enough for them. So it gives me pleasure to just like kind of have people bridge that gap in their knowledge and be like, all right, this guy is a Muslim, but he's also friendly. He's also sociable. He's also just genuinely really nice.